Hello, everyone. I'm back with another astrological video here. Recording today is June 2023, just one day before the June solstice. And we're going to look at this, not the solstice, but we're going to look at a couple other planets that are really been prominently featured in the evening sky, Mars and Venus. And that's going to be the center of this video, and we'll kind of give you kind of a taste of their pattern and what is really going on with him. Um, this is the kind of topic that I could talk for many parts over many days and explaining what Mars and Venus are doing and the longer term consequences and of these the dance, what I call the dance of Venus and Mars in the sky. So we're going to get into that. And I also wanted to share that I'm going to be in the future, I'm going to be soon doing some live Q&A, answering your astrological questions, along with like a mini presentation to kind of kick things off in those live ones. And so I'm excited about doing that and being able to answer your questions and through chat, and that will be a lot of fun. So look out for some announcements around that in the near future, particularly over this summer here. So just a couple updates. I'm going to be doing some traveling this summer as well in California and in Oregon at various locations, holistic fairs. So I'd go to my website, inspiralnexus.com, and click on the events, and you can find a listing of all of those. And you can also subscribe to my newsletter to keep updated with my travels, and sometimes I do presentations at these particular fairs, and so I could be available for personal one-on-one readings, in person, so right in front of me. So that's always fun to do, and so I'm based here in Southern Oregon, so I do a lot of travel up and down I-5 here in Oregon, and then also down south into California. So without further ado, we're going to take a look at Mars and Venus. So, okay, episode 50 of Signs, Planets, and Stellar Rhythms, the dance and drama of Venus and Mars. So these two planets are typically they're the closest planets to Earth in general in the solar system, and they are typically talked about, like when you talk about one, you also talk about the other. And there's a symbolism around Mars and Venus, with Mars representing and shamanic astrology in particular, the principle of the masculine, and then the principle of the feminine in Venus. But energetically, one is, more of a receptive energy, like archetypally, just the energy of Venus itself is more receptive, and the energy itself of Mars is much more of like an active force. But depends on the sign that they're in, and so there's a lot of like gray area in between of how they show up in our lives, particularly in our personal lives, but also collectively when you're looking at the longer cycles that are happening. So what is going on with Mars and Venus, and how is that going to be influencing our lives? So let's take a look at this. So on June 5th, when Venus moved into the sign of Leo, which it's going to be for about 4 months until October 8th of 2023. This is a symbolic representation using stellarium and some graphics of where Venus moved into the sign of Leo. And the whole crab constellation is in the sign of Leo, the temporal sign, I like to say, or the seasonal sign. Again, it's a sign in time, as it's connected to the Earth, the calendrical seasons that we have connected ultimately due to the tilt of the Earth and to the orbit of the Earth, along with the spin. So Venus has entered the sign of Leo, and then back on June 5th, it first moved in. Mars already had been, as of, I believe it was May 20th when it moved into Leo. So that was then. So look at how, again, this is symbolic representation. It doesn't show the actual distance between the two planets. In the sky, it'll actually looked a little bit farther away. But many of you may have noticed Castor and Pollux, like these two lights that were to the right of it. Well, in the southern hemisphere, things look upside down, so it's going to look different if you're south of the equator. But those were featured in the sky for several weeks. They were coming together, particularly as Venus and Mars passed them, and now they're making their way toward Regulus. So let's look here. We got on July 1st. Here is where they get to their official closest point in the sky, with Venus and Mars right here. You can see they're between the Crab here and the Lion constellation here. And there's this star here, Regulus. This marks the boundary of where the sign of Virgo starts. So the Lion is actually slowly, over many centuries, continuing to move into the sign of Virgo. So Mars reaches that later in July, and Venus doesn't reach that until it fully goes retrograde and then goes direct. And then finally, after the first week of October, it moves into the sign of Virgo. But Regulus is a powerful marker, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that as we get more into this presentation here. Okay, so what does it just mean for Mars and Venus and Leo just by themselves? So they gather together in the evening sky in June and July, and this whole period, particularly Venus, it includes this transformational metamorphosis of Venus in August. This is a Venus moving between the sun and the earth and disappearing in the night sky, the evening sky, and then reappearing in the morning sky. That's again in late August. So everyone has a masculine and feminine. As I mentioned before, Venus represents the principle of the feminine or feminine principle, and Mars the masculine principle. And so it's representative of a plethora of shades of gender expressions as well. So in ancient times, the Mars and Venus gathering in the sky, and even in times of the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, they inspired myth and stories and had an enormous impact in human societies, including many modern day stories, particularly around relationship and the more personal initiations of men and women and everything in between and outside of that. So what is the sign of Leo? Well, Leo is a sign of a creative vision, and it's about radical, radiant self-love. It's a sign I like to associate with the word creatrix. It's this embodiment of creativity and self-love. There are other signs that have some measure of it. I would say Scorpio has a certain amount of that and utilizing it in a different way than Leo does. But Leo would have that sort of that closer relationship with that particular word called creatrix with an X at the end there. So with that said, we're going to talk a little bit more about this gathering of Mars and Venus and kind of go a little deeper into this stuff, along with the pattern that they weave together. Again, this is just a taste of things of how Mars and Venus do their dance in the sky. And it's always one that's worth following. And if you only follow a few things in the sky, like the moon and the sun, Mars and Venus, I would recommend to include in that, because they're easier to follow. They move around fairly quickly relative to, say, Saturn and Jupiter in the sky. So during this period between June 3rd and July 24th, this is when Mars and Venus are within 10 degrees. So what is 10 degrees? 10 degrees is roughly the equivalent of you extend your arm with a closed hand with your thumb kind of sticking out a little bit, like in a fist type of environment, but not the thumb tucked in, just outside of that. That's roughly about 10 degrees from that one knuckle to the next knuckle, to the other knuckle, last knuckle there. and like one finger's width is about 1 to 2 degrees, 1.5 to 2 degrees, somewhere in that zone. So you get, when you, from a shamanic perspective, anything within 10 degrees is considered a conjunction. Not a, of course, not an exact conjunction. That's a different level of conjunction, but this is like they're energetically interacting with each other more strongly when they're within 10 degrees, as opposed to say 15 or 20 degrees. So the creative essence of this Leo, it's opens up the environment for humanity to tap into its own creative radiance and to simply become. So this is part of that joining of Mars and Venus, is to help the creativity come more into aliveness through self-love, and an opportunity to really embody it in a healthy way, not just from a unhealthy egoic perspective of vanity, narcissism, but a co-creation together of working with self-love and being showing you love, that you love yourself, and the ability that other people can experience that, and the warmth that you bring out through that self-love. So at its core, it can help us get in touch with a deeper and more intuitive understanding of what self-love means to all of us individually and potentially on a collective level. There's also an evolution into the sign of Virgo. This is really like a part of one of the critical parts of this whole dynamic between Mars and Venus, and I would say even more so with just the Venus in general, in the star Regulus, something I mentioned before. And when we get to the early to mid-July, that's when Mars and Venus are a lot closer, and with Mars actually passes Regulus. Regulus sits at 0 degrees Virgo. So of what the Regulus has in connection to this whole thing, not only as a star that these two planets are gonna, one passes quickly in July, the other one passes, doesn't really, it hangs around it, but doesn't pass it until we get to October. But Regulus features strongly in July, and then again in October. So there is a evolution into Virgo through this image of where Regulus sits, called the Sphinx. And the actual Sphinx, the Great Sphinx of Egypt, is connected to this constellation of the Lion, where Mars and Venus are eventually moving into and beyond it. So it taps into the archetypal energy of that and the mysteries that are there, the brilliance that can come through, and the knowledge and the wisdom that can also be generated, but also the complexity of what could be, and that there is no sort of end in sight to this great labyrinth of knowledge and workings of the universe. This is what that great mystery, there's a strong alchemy there. And in that alchemy between Virgo and Leo, there's this great unknown. And this is the part where Venus, Mars first, but then Venus later, really starts to explore this during this summer to early fall period. One of the shadows of this is that it could lead to more egoic identification, particularly vanity and selfish responses. It may also create further division in the collaboration potential of the masculine and feminine, all of us. So there is a potential of it going, further deeper into the shadow. Now, Mars and Venus are not connected right now to an area of either the sky or an aspect to a planet right now of the shadow. So I don't really see that being like a large thing, but it can sometimes be translated depending on each individual. Like maybe that's activating a part of your chart where there is a shadow, there is a death rebirth experience. Perhaps there's a surrender happening and doesn't feel good, or maybe it's blowing things up too much expansion wise, and there's no check and balance, for example. So that could be another, like, a version of that shadow. So something to be aware of with Mars and Venus here. So this pattern between Mars and Venus in the sky repeats about every 6.5 years or 77 months. The next time this occurs, and this is in the fall, October through December period here in the Northern Hemisphere, of 2029, but that doesn't happen until while they will be in the sign of Capricorn. But in order to be sort of in the same sign or maybe close to the adjacent sign, it falls into a 32-year pattern in which it will be in the same area of the sky and sign. Before this was 1991, and the next repeat performance of this with Leo will be in 2055. So there's this other pattern. So there's a 6.5-year pattern. There's also a 32-year pattern. So just typically in this type of pattern, there are normally 2 evening sky conjunctions between Mars and Venus. But this year, Mars and Venus come only within 3.5 degrees. As I shared on here on July 1st, it gets their closest point. Venus slows down and then retreats. It goes retrograde because it's evolved. I mean, from a symbolic perspective, archetypal perspective, it's going through its own personal evolution and metamorphosizing into a new sort of goddess in the sky. It doesn't mean it's running away from something. It's simply, oh, I am ready to evolve. So see you later, Mars. I'm doing my own thing here. So that's what that's about there. Now, as I said, they come within 4 degrees or 3.5 degrees. And this is between June 24th and July 9th on a wider range within 4 degrees. From 3.5 degrees, it's June 30th to July 3rd. So Regulus, the star Regulus, which you talked about, the heart, the lion, also is sort of the heart of the Sphinx as well. This Mars-Venus pattern or dance at its essence is about humanity. We have many projected stories placed upon the planets throughout the ages as they relate to men and women and how that polarity of the masculine and feminine and various deities across the planet. But of course, they were interpreted in very different ways and a broad range of examples of, this is not just about men and women or the masculine and feminine, but there's a much broader range here, a wide variety, a rainbow of colors that exist in all of this. So something to think about as this is about. So it isn't just like, oh, man, woman, or whatever. It's not that, basic. It's really much more complex. One of the more ancient stories, though, if you look up the ancient goddess Inanna, Inanna, she was the precursor to the Roman goddess Venus and the Greek goddess Aphrodite. There's also the Egyptian goddess Isis as well. She had her different gods that connected with her in ancient times, ancient Mesopotamia, Dumuzi, which also represented Mars in the sky, and then Nergal as well, also represented Mars in the sky. So both, it depends on the phase of the Mars cycle that represented the actual god that was working in the sky with the Queen of Heaven and Earth, which was Inanna. So both of those go back, both of those stories between Dumuzi and Inanna, and then Nergal and Inanna, Nergal and Ereshkigal, which is the underworld version or the sister of Inanna. Both of those go back over 4,000 years to ancient Mesopotamia. This is the area of the globe that has the Tigris and Euphrates River, modern day Iraq, and then Turkey, and to some degree ancient Persia. In that zone, that's kind of where a lot of that action happened over 4,000 years ago there. Here's just a graphic of when we look at the pattern, the greater pattern between Mars and Venus, in shamanic astrology, they've been called sagas, which are epic stories. And this Mars and Venus certainly qualifies more of an epic story when you're looking at the greater cycles of these planets. So right here, we don't have any exact evening conjunctions, but we do get one in the morning in February of 2024. So that'll be a separate video that I'll do for you all here. But 52 days of visible nearness to get with 10-degree orb here this year in 2023. And then they're together for about 43 days in 2024. But if we go back other times when we had this sort of similar pattern, we had the last time this happened with two evening conjunctions was back in 2010 to 2012, 2011 being the sort of that middle year of when that happened. And they had two evening conjunctions. That was really the standard of this greater pattern or greater saga. And the next time that happens is, again, 2029 to 2031. And then this is the last time for this longer pattern where they actually have conjunctions with each other in the evening sky. Now, there's other things that other patterns. This isn't the only pattern. There's two other major patterns, and you can get an evening conjunction in those, particularly one other one that we can talk. I'll talk about at a later time, but it can happen in that way. Again, this is just a little preview. It's not to be so you have to memorize this, but getting familiar. These are all to deal with what is called our synodic cycles of these planets, Mars and Venus in particular. A whole different, like I said, you could talk about this for days and days and days about what the synodic cycles are, but it has to do with the planet's relationship with the sun and how we see it from Earth in the sky. Okay, so Mars and Venus are in different parts of their own cycles. In June, Venus begins to catch up with Mars, and which is already at the time of this recording is happening. And I saw a piece of that again last night. I've been following that whenever the clouds part. I saw a piece of that when I had a good visual last night as the rain started to break up. But Venus slows down and then will go retrograde on July 22nd. Mars then rebuilds its distance from Venus as Venus descends faster into the glare of the sun. That happens in August. Officially August 6th to the 19th. It will not be visible. Well, some people may be able to see it on the 18th and 19th. So I say August 19th, 20, because it depends on where you are on the globe and what kind of horizon line you will see around you. So August 19th or 20th, and that's when it is officially 10 degrees from the sun. That's a rule of thumb with, for example, Jupiter, Venus, and Mercury. If they're 10 degrees from the sun, there's a good chance you could see that planet. For Mars and Saturn, they need to be about 15 degrees because they tend to be dimmer when they're that close to the sun because they're much farther away from Earth. So this is the kind of planetary action that has inspired stories in the masculine and feminine, and now is also creating new stories. So this is part of the co-creation, the cauldron of co-creation I've talked about before. We're co-creating new stories, and Mars and Venus are part of this. So whenever Mars meets the moon, there are these things called tasks in the synodic cycle. So it's finishing that up before we get to the end of September. And then Mars does end up disappearing in the glare of the sun by then. So this is a more archetypally, symbolically, this is more youthful time for Mars, the masculine principle, youthful exploration, adventure. For Venus, though, it's at its higher state of evolution. It's more of I've reached my potential and now I'm ready to metamorphosize into another version, another archetypal expression, which is in this case Leo. It started way back in the synodic cycle of Venus started way back in January of 2022. So August 19th/20th marks the end of that synodic cycle and the beginning of a new for Venus. So helpers and guides in the dance, in the Venus and Mars saga, or we can call it the dance or the story, they're typically allies, guides, and helpers that show up in a wide variety of ways. These allies and helpers show up in the guise of stars, constellations, the moon, planets and asteroids, the sun. In 2023, this is the time period that gets really noticed between June and August in particular. So this would include the star Regulus, the moon, a few other stars from the Lion constellation, and the planet Mercury, because Mercury does come around and catch up with Venus because Venus ends up retrograding and So they actually have a kind of a get together, if you will. Mercury serves primarily astrologically as the messenger and travel guide for Venus and Mars. Regulus, which sits as a powerful lighthouse for the two planets, can inspire and in helping them along their journey. The moon tends to serve multiple functions depending on the phase of each planet's cycle. So the case of Moon and Venus, for example, it represents the last of the gates that Venus is having to go through to ascension, to, in this case, metamorphosis. For Mars, the moon serves as a marker for the challenges and tasks that the red planet needs to complete to continue on in its journey. So that's, again, that's a longer discussion there. And perhaps in future videos where I do them live, there can, some of that, those questions can be asked during that time. So that'll be a lot of fun to do. All right, so let's take a look at another date that I wanted to show you when Mars moves into the sign of Virgo. So this line that I've got, yellowish line that is going vertical, semi-vertical, slightly tilted, that's the dividing line between the signs of Leo and Virgo. Now, you don't see that in the sky, obviously, but when you see the star Regulus and you see Mars right next to it, that's a marker to, at this time in the age that we live in, a few hundred years ago, that wasn't the case. But Regulus moved into the sign of Virgo back in 2011. And so whenever a planet reaches that point, you know that that's the start of Virgo, the sign of Virgo, not the constellation. That's a whole other layer of knowledge and wisdom that can come through for humanity through the stars, so that's, again, a different one. But this is a good marker for everyone if they wanted to kind of connect into the star Regulus. I know that there's, some people have anything in like the latter degrees of Regulus, or not Regulus, latter degrees of Leo, and the early degrees of Virgo. Then Regulus becomes a personal star for you, particularly if it's a planet such as Mars or Venus themselves on your natal chart. Maybe it's the moon, maybe it's your natal sun, maybe it's your rising sign. It can have a powerful impact and influence in your life. Now you can see Venus here. It's by that point, Venus had slowed down, and 12 days after this, it goes retrograde. And Mercury is to the bottom right of the screen here. And later on in July and early August, that's when there's a catch up between Mercury and Venus here. You can see how far away they are from Castor and Pollux of the twins, and how far they've gotten there into the Lion. Again, this is the evening sky, and by August 20th, Venus will be seen in the morning sky, and while Mars will still be in the evening. So the sun will be dividing the two planets, if you will. And so they'll be on separate paths for a while until we get to next year, and then they'll both be in the early morning sky together, particularly in February of 2024. Here's just a really brief look that I'll do a separate video specifically on the new Venus synodic cycle, but I wanted to give everyone some additional insights here. This is July 20th, and I used July 20th instead of the 22nd to show the moon coming in conjuncting with Mars, while Venus is very, very close to its retrograde point. And you can see Mercury still moving at a good clip here, closing in on Venus. And Venus is very near Regulus at this point. That 150 degree mark, that's where zero Virgo is. So Venus will station retrograde on the 22nd at 2836 Leo. That's only a degree and a half away from Regulus, the star Regulus, which is at 0007 Virgo. Venus will stay retrograde for about 6 weeks until September 3rd, 2023 at 1212 Leo. So when I've been doing readings for people, I've been looking at if they've got some personal points or planets in the sign of Leo. And to some degree, if it's opposite, say in Aquarius or in the other fixed signs, traditional fixed signs of Scorpio and Taurus. In shamanic language, it would be signs of self-exploration in that modality. If you've got that and those signs, then Venus is very likely, providing some additional insight and wisdom in its transit. Venus will spend over 4 months in the sign of Leo until October 8th, June 5th to October 8th. And when Venus goes retrograde, it signals that a new Venus cycle is roughly a month away. And Venus will have its heliacal rise, meaning its first morning star rise, beginning an entirely new 19-month synodic cycle. That's officially August 20th, but again, August 19th can be for some people too, if they are able to see it then. Again, when it's moving retrograde, it's moving away from the sun really, really quickly because it's only in the underworld for just no more than about a 2-week period at its maximum. Sometimes, depending on your horizon and how clear your skies are, it may only be gone for about an 8 to 10 day period. But for most people, it's about roughly close to 2 weeks. But that's what I've got for you here about Mars and Venus, and to take advantage of whatever skies you do have and tune into it for yourselves, because this is really the main theme for this summer, starting again June of 2023. And if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, it's the main theme of your winter. So you get to also tune into this with the sky upside down from our perspective, just as we are upside down from your perspective there. So thank you all for being a part of this. And I'm shamanic astrologer Erik Roth here, and I do personal astrology readings, classes, events, and astrocartography. And you can find me at inspiralnexus.com, as well as mystaralchemy.com, where I do courses with Caitlin Castell about the stars and astrology and what their meaning is. And we're going to be launching a whole new online course about the stellar gateways. So there's some really fascinating things to tune into on really working with ceremonially, personally. So look out for announcements around that. And I bid you all a happy June solstice. Until next time, everyone, take care.